What is the relationship between creativity and critical thinking, which I was in up till last year, I was in academia and I was an educator of mathematics. And seeing the decline in critical thinking and the exacerbation of that decline by the digital distractions that we're being presented with. So if you could speak about that relationship between creativity and critical thinking.
Absolutely. Hmm, Very, very big question, actually. First of all, I don't think that the two are opposed to each other. We actually utilize analytical and critical thinking within the creative process. So I kind of alluded to it a little bit where, there is that phase where it's actually encouraged not to have that critical, let's say, critic or self-critic on your shoulder. And that would be the ideation part, essentially, where you're having a lot of different possibilities, for example, where there isn't necessarily one right answer like there is in mathematics currently, right? But you might want to just explore the entire possibility space, for example. But once you've done that, your critical thinking very much needs to be brought into it in terms of analyzing what's feasible, actually kind of testing out certain routes and all the rest of it. And again, when we come to creativity, it's a very broad term, right? And so when we're thinking about innovation and when we're thinking about innovation, let's say in product or in engineering or in physics or, any other kind of research space as well, it has to be mired in fact. And so, there is not really that separation between being able to think fluidly while still having, that ability to hone in on, what's a physical law, for example, or what is known about this and this chemical, substrate, or, what is the kind of mathematical formula for this, right? So there's always that kind of, it has to be grounded in that kind of I would say body of knowledge, right? And that's where I think the critical thinking might be a great kind of bridger, but is utilized, I would say, throughout. So maybe a short answer is I don't necessarily see that there's a difference. It's just maybe one particularly thinks of creativity as maybe fluid thinking, but I wouldn't necessarily say that there's no critical thinking within that fluidity.
I'm curious as to whether, Rana, you kind of meant that maybe slightly more in terms of like social intelligence and perhaps to do with other humans, sort of, which is which is why I see you added that extra bit there, which seems to be on the decline. I love the cynicism.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and thank you for your reply. To me, it's almost like they're used in concert to varying degrees to navigate that process where, creativity, yes, it's very fluid, and critical thinking could be thought of as very rigid. But in one sense, to me, it's the critical thinking that gives us this expansive opportunity, and the critical thinking that actually roots it into fruition. And my thinking is with AI seemingly taking away an aspect of our thought process. And to me, it's yes, on a very basic level it is, but I also feel like it has the power, if we can use it well, to scaffold us to this next
Yeah.
level of both creativity and critical thinking. And
yeah, I definitely agree with you. I just did the first part of a course earlier today where I was literally literally talking about this and how just to give you a bit of history, it turns out that part of our brain that has evolved over decades, if not centuries, that's been able to digest large amounts of information comprehend and elicit the the essence of, say, that 400, 500 page book, that part of the brain is actually shrinking due to the latest digital media. Now, that has happened. There's also this thing about, Google searches, are they just, essentially a replacement of our memories? Right. Right. Versus, I don't know, I completely agree with you. Within academia, you're taught to research your sources, primary source, secondary source, all this kind of stuff. Really, you think that? Now, where does that come from? Let's actually, interrogate where that piece of information comes from. And, and a lot of that leads directly into this whole, debate about fake news and all that kind of stuff anyway, right? So, and the fact that language models do hallucinate. And then we've got now, instead of search engines, we've got answer engines coming to fruition, and they're like, they collate, like, okay, that's nice. I don't have to go searching. But I still want to know that if I click on this reference, it takes me to the right reference, right? And I need to know that I can read that reference and then read the reference that it references and all the rest of it, and really kind of satisfy myself that this is something that is a true and as far as anything that can be true, but if there's any sort of consensus on this, or like whether I can satisfy myself that there's some sort of like sense throughout the whole thing. But we do now have a chance at the nascency of this new technology to be more aware of how we're developing it, and the user interaction with it, and is there a way of changing it from that kind of prompt-based way of doing things? Is there ways of kind of like what we're doing? Like, we're literally sitting there going, how can we augment your creativity? This thing isn't just going to be your sort of facilitator, it's going to provoke you. Haha, what about that? Right? So why not change these kinds of interaction designs and be like, right, through provocation, we can actually stimulate certain different kinds of sparks and different ways of thinking. Okay, great. That's one way of thinking about it. I do think there's something we could do there, like you say, to elevate both ways of thinking there.
It's fascinating because it's for the future of learning, which I'm so interested in as well. I think it's going to to not only improve things, and it's going to make things more available for sure. I think it's already doing that, but it's also going to, once again, just like all of these conversations that we have on Humble Mind, especially about AI in the future, it always somehow comes back to some of the work that we have got to do, certain biases that we've got to first overcome. Never mind what AI or any other technology can do or can't do. It's like, whoa, actually, guys, we're still at the drawing board, with a couple of major things. And we've got to sort those out first. And I think that what you were saying now, if we're getting certain engines or certain co-pilots that are able to provoke us or to kind of throw more things in there and perhaps even challenge us on our knowledge, I don't know how receptive a lot of us are going to end up being to that. Because, for example, when we're in conversation normally, we're not always listening. We're waiting for our chance to talk, and we want to also confirm our own bias. That's what humans do. We always do that. We look for the sources that we want to have, be in concord with what we wanted to agree with what we think already, right? That's confirmation bias, isn't it? So that part is going to be an interesting one to circumnavigate or to evolve through. I'm not sure how that will happen, but yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So it would be interesting to utilize AI to help us overcome our human biases.
Right.
For example, right? And I think, we're doing certain work on that front by utilizing very transparent knowledge graphs, which are within different domains of knowledge and spaces of expertise, let's say, within subject areas and things like that. But I'm sure there's going to be other ways which are much more direct, which show up. Well, this is my personal bias. Okay. How do I do this so that it doesn't totally antagonize me, or actually, helps me kind of bridge that barrier into other ways of thinking or other ways of knowing, maybe. And I think that's something that is kind of largely untapped and a rich area that we can go into.
Yeah, yeah. That's fascinating because when we go into the area of not just information, but how we're essentially feeling, and not to make it a kumbaya moment, but that's essentially what we're after as human beings. We're not necessarily after more knowledge. We want to be able to have a sense of purpose or recognition through a feeling that we get, right? That's why we, perhaps that's something, when we spoke about earlier, when we remember songs, 30 years ago. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast, but I can remember that because there's something there that it registers on an emotional level, and it immediately takes me back to, the feeling I had with my dad, or, walking in the park on a certain day. And so these things are so kind of linked to what seems like some kind of memory center in the brain, which takes me back to a feeling, ultimately, not
Yeah.
necessarily information, but an emotional state. And that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So you kind of talked about, there's also this thing about like changing from information into knowledge, and then from knowledge into wisdom, right? Which is, again, sounds a bit pithy, but that's like very different way of just information, right? By the time you get to wisdom. And I think emotion is definitely one of the bridges. And yet there's some more. There's some more. There's that kind of ineffable experience of humanness.